Tonight, we begin with a story that's been whispered through countless generations, passed down like a treasured heirloom from grandmother to grandchild, a tale of magic, courage, and love that's meant to carry you gently into the realm of dreams. So settle into your pillows, pull your blankets close, and let your breathing slow as we journey together to a kingdom where roses bloom eternal, and sleep holds the power to heal even the deepest wounds. This isn't just any bedtime story. This is the kind of tale that wraps around you like the softest silk, designed to quiet the restless thoughts of the day and guide both young and old into peaceful slumber. Whether you're 7 or 70, this story speaks to that part of your heart that still believes in magic, still hopes for happy endings, and still finds comfort in the rhythm of once upon a time. In a land far beyond the rolling hills you might see from your bedroom window, there stood a kingdom called Rosevale. It was the sort of place where morning mist danced through cobblestone streets and evening stars seemed to hang just a little lower, as if they wanted to whisper secrets to anyone willing to listen. The castle walls were covered in climbing roses that never seemed to wither, their petals catching sunlight during the day and glowing softly under moonbeams. At night, King Edmund and Queen Isabel ruled this peaceful realm with gentle wisdom and hearts full of kindness. They were the sort of rulers who knew every baker's name, who stopped to admire children's drawings in the marketplace, and who believed that the greatest treasure in any kingdom wasn't gold or jewels, but the laughter of happy people. For many years, they had longed for a child to share their love with, someone who could fill the quiet corners of their hearts with joy. Then, on the most beautiful spring morning anyone could remember, their daughter was born. The princess arrived with the dawn, her first cry harmonizing with the song of awakening birds. She had hair the color of spun gold and eyes like sapphires touched by starlight. They named her Aurora, after the goddess of dawn, because she brought light to everyone who saw her. The kingdom celebrated for 7 days and 7 nights. Flowers rained from windows. Musicians played on every corner, and the very air seemed to shimmer with happiness. Even the roses on the castle walls bloomed more vibrantly, as if they too were welcoming the little princess into the world. On the 7th day of celebration, 3 fairy godmothers arrived at the castle. They came not with fanfare or announcement, but quietly, like the first whisper of evening breeze. Flora wore robes the color of sunset, her silver hair crowned with tiny flowers that seemed to grow fresh with each step. Fauna dressed in earth-brown velvet, and wherever she walked, small woodland creatures gathered to listen to her gentle voice. And Merryweather, the youngest of the 3, sparkled in blue silk that matched her mischievous eyes. These weren't ordinary fairies from the stories you might know. They were ancient guardians of the realm, protectors of innocence and joy, who appeared only when their magic was truly needed. They had watched over the kingdom of Rosevale for centuries, ensuring that kindness always triumphed over cruelty, that hope never faded, even in the darkest times. Flora stepped forward first, her voice like wind chimes touched by summer air. "Little princess," she said, extending her hand toward the sleeping baby, "I give you the gift of beauty, not just the beauty that shows in your face, but the beauty that glows from within. May your heart be so lovely that all who meet you see goodness reflected in your eyes." A shower of rose petals fell from nowhere, swirling around the princess before settling like a gentle blanket across her tiny form. Fauna approached next, her earthy presence bringing the scent of pine forests in morning meadows. "Sweet child," she whispered, "I give you the gift of song. May your voice carry the music of babbling brooks and rustling leaves. When you speak, may others hear harmony. When you sing, may the very birds pause to listen and learn." Golden musical notes seemed to dance in the air above Aurora's cradle, tinkling like distant bells before fading into silence. Merryweather prepared to offer her gift, her hands glowing with soft blue light. But before she could speak, the great doors of the throne room burst open with a sound like thunder. The celebration music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the roses outside the windows seemed to droop as a chill filled the air. Enter Maleficent, a sorceress whose beauty was as sharp as winter frost and twice as dangerous. She wore robes of midnight black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her staff, topped with a glowing orb, cast eerie shadows on the walls. Her presence brought with it the scent of dying flowers and the whisper of autumn wind through bare branches. How curious! Her voice rang through the silent hall like the toll of a funeral bell. It seems I was not invited to this joyous celebration. Her smile was beautiful and terrible, like lightning splitting a dark sky. Perhaps it was merely an oversight. Surely the king and queen would not deliberately exclude me from honoring their precious daughter. King Edmund rose from his throne, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. "You are welcome here, Maleficent. Please, join our celebration. There is room at our table for all who come in peace." Maleficent's laughter was like crystal shattering against stone. How gracious, how perfectly, insufferably kind. She glided toward the cradle where Aurora slept, still peaceful, despite the tension crackling in the air. "I too shall bestow a gift upon this beautiful child." The three fairy godmothers moved closer together, their magic beginning to shimmer around them like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Flora's flowers began to bloom more rapidly. Fauna's woodland creatures scurried for hiding places. Merryweather's blue light pulsed brighter. "Listen well, all who gather here," Maleficent announced, raising her staff high above her head. The orb at its tip began to glow with sickly green light. "The princess shall indeed grow in grace and beauty, beloved by all who know her. But before the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and fall into a sleep like death." Gasps echoed through the throne room. Queen Isabel reached for her baby, holding Aurora close to her chest, as if her arms alone could shield her daughter from the curse. King Edmund drew his sword, though he knew no blade could cut through dark magic. Maleficent continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And this sleep shall last for 100 years, until true love's kiss awakens her. But know this, your majesties, true love is rarer than dragon's tears, and more precious than unicorn's breath. Few find it in a lifetime. Fewer still find it pure enough to break enchantments woven with ancient power." With another crystalline laugh, she began to fade like morning mist touched by sunlight. "Sleep well, little princess. Dream sweetly while you may." And then she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of withered roses and the echo of her terrible gift. The throne room remained frozen in horrified silence for what seemed like hours, but was probably only heartbeats. Then Merryweather stepped forward, her blue robes rustling with determination. "Wait," she called out, though Maleficent had already vanished. "I still have my gift to give." She approached the cradle where Aurora lay, somehow still sleeping peacefully. Through all the commotion, "I cannot undo what has been done, for Maleficent's magic is old and powerful, but I can soften the curse." She placed her small hands gently on the edge of the cradle, and her blue light grew warm and comforting. "Sweet princess, you shall indeed fall into slumber on your 16th birthday, but it will not be the sleep of death. Instead, you shall rest in dreams so beautiful that time will pass like a single night. And when true love's kiss finds you, you shall awaken as fresh and lovely as the moment you closed your eyes." The king and queen felt a small measure of comfort at these words, though their hearts still ached with worry. For their daughter's future, Flora stepped forward, her sunset robes swirling around her. "We must take the princess away from here, to a place where she can grow up safely, far from spinning wheels, in the reach of dark magic." "But she belongs here," Queen Isabel protested, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She is our daughter, our joy, our heart." Fauna placed a gentle hand on the queen's shoulder. "Love sometimes means letting go so that what we cherish most can flourish. We will raise her as our own, in a cottage deep in the forest where magic runs pure and Maleficent's power cannot easily reach. There she will know happiness and freedom, even if she cannot know her true heritage." The decision was made with heavy hearts but clear minds. That very night, under cover of darkness, the three fairy godmothers spirited Princess Aurora away to a small cottage hidden deep in the Whispering Woods. They changed her name to Briar Rose, a simple country girl who would grow up believing herself to be their niece, loved and protected, but unaware of her royal birth or the curse that hung over her, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Meanwhile, in a kingdom beyond the eastern mountains, another child was growing up with his own destiny to fulfill. Prince Philip of Aldoria was everything a storybook prince should be, but with an authenticity that made him more than just a fairy tale hero. He was tall and strong, with dark hair that caught sunlight like polished wood, and eyes the color of storm clouds just before they clear. But it wasn't his appearance that made him remarkable. It was the way he listened when servants spoke to him, as if their words mattered as much as any nobleman's counsel. The way he helped stable boys with heavy loads without being asked. The way he could make anyone laugh, from the youngest page to the most serious court advisor. Philip had grown up hearing stories of adventure and heroism, tales of knights who rescued kingdoms and princes who saved the day. But unlike many young nobles who dreamed of glory and fame, Philip understood that true heroism often came in quiet moments, in choosing kindness when anger would be easier, in standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, in keeping promises even when no one would know if you broke them. His father, King Hubert, was a practical man who believed in alliances and treaties, in solving problems with handshakes, and signed documents rather than swords and battles. A good king, he often told his son, knows when to fight and when to make friends. The strongest kingdoms are built on trust, not fear. King Hubert had been friends with King Edmund of Rosevale since their youth, when they'd trained together as young knights and dreamed of ruling their kingdoms with wisdom and justice. So it seemed only natural that their children should one day unite their realms through marriage. The betrothal had been arranged when Philip was barely old enough to ride a pony, and Aurora was still sleeping in her cradle. Of course, Philip knew nothing of curses or sleeping spells, or the fact that his intended bride had vanished into the forest on the very night the engagement was announced. He simply grew up knowing that somewhere in the world was a princess named Aurora who would one day be his wife, and he hoped they would be happy together. As the years passed, Philip often wondered about this mysterious princess. Would she be kind? Would she laugh at his jokes? Would she share his love of morning rides through dewy meadows and evening walks beneath star-filled skies? He hoped so, but he also knew that arranged marriages didn't always lead to love. Still, he believed that if two people tried hard enough to understand each other, to be patient and gentle and honest, love might grow like a garden carefully tended. Meanwhile, deep in the whispering woods, a young woman who called herself Briar Rose was growing into everything her fairy godmothers had hoped she would become. She had inherited Flora's gift of inner and outer beauty, Fauna's gift of song, and something extra that belonged entirely to herself. A spirit of joy that made every day feel like a celebration, a curiosity about the world that turned even mundane tasks into adventures. Briar Rose woke each morning with the sunrise, her golden hair catching the first rays of light that filtered through the cottage windows. She would stretch like a sleepy cat, smile at the painted wooden birds that decorated her bedroom walls, and begin her day by singing. Not because anyone asked her to, but because music seemed to bubble up from her heart like water from a spring. Her voice was indeed a gift. When she sang while hanging laundry, the birds would perch nearby to listen. When she hummed while gathering berries, deer would emerge from the forest to watch her with gentle, curious eyes. Even the wind seemed to quiet when Briar Rose made music, as if the whole world wanted to hear what she had to say. The cottage where she lived with her 3 aunts was exactly the sort of place where magic and ordinary life blended seamlessly together. It had a thatched roof that stayed perfectly dry even in the heaviest rain, windows that always let in just the right amount of light, and a garden where flowers bloomed in impossible combinations. Purple roses grew next to golden daisies. Silver lilies shared space with crimson poppies, and in the center of it all stood an apple tree that bore fruit in every season, its branches heavy with red apples that tasted like sunshine and summer mornings. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather had adapted well to life without their magic. Well, mostly without their magic. They still couldn't resist using just a tiny bit now, and then Flora would wave her hand and wilted flowers would perk up again. Fauna would whisper to injured woodland creatures, and they would heal faster than nature usually allowed. Merryweather would touch broken dishes, and they would mend themselves, though never quite perfectly. There was always a thin line where the crack had been, a reminder that some things, once broken, carry their history forever. They had told Briar Rose that her parents had died when she was very young, and that they had raised her out of love for her dear departed mother, who had been their dearest friend. It wasn't entirely a lie. Queen Isabel had indeed become dear to them during the few precious days they'd known her. And in a way, the Princess Aurora had died the night they spirited her away from the castle. Briar Rose was someone new, someone who could live freely without the weight of crowns and curses. But secrets, like seeds, have a way of growing, whether you tend them or not. As Briar Rose approached her 16th birthday, she began to dream strange dreams filled with grand ballrooms and towering spires, with faces she didn't recognize, but somehow knew, with a voice calling her name. Not Briar Rose, but another name that felt familiar on her tongue, even though she'd never heard it spoken aloud. She would wake from these dreams with tears on her cheeks and a longing in her heart that she couldn't name, a feeling that somewhere, somehow, she belonged to a larger story than the quiet life she knew in the cottage. Her aunts noticed the change in her, the way she would stare out the window at nothing, the way her songs sometimes carried notes of sadness that hadn't been there before. Perhaps, Flora suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, it's time we told her something closer to the truth. But Maleficent, Fauna whispered, glancing toward the windows as if the sorceress might be listening from the shadows. If she discovers where Briar Rose is, if she learns that the princess still lives. Merryweather poked at the fire with an iron rod, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. The girl has a right to know who she is, and besides, she's nearly 16. The curse will find her whether we speak of it or not. At least if she knows, she can be prepared. They decided to wait until after her birthday celebration. One more day of innocence, one more day of believing that the cottage in the woods was her whole world, and that her 3 aunts were the extent of her family. After that, they would sit her down and explain about kingdoms and curses, about parents who loved her from afar, and a destiny she couldn't escape. But destiny, like dawn, arrives on its own schedule, indifferent to human plans and preparations. On the morning of her 16th birthday, Briar Rose woke with a strange energy coursing through her veins. She felt as if she could run from one end of the forest to the other without getting tired, as if she could sing loud enough for the whole world to hear. The very air seemed to shimmer around her, and colors appeared more vivid than usual. The green of the leaves was emerald bright. The blue of the sky was sapphire deep. Even ordinary brown earth seemed to glow with hidden gold. Her aunts had planned a celebration with a cake that Flora had baked without magic, quite proud of herself for remembering to add sugar this time, and gifts they had made with their own hands rather than conjuring with spells. But Briar Rose felt too restless to sit still for a party. "I think I'll take a walk," she announced after breakfast, kissing each aunt on the cheek. "The forest is calling to me today, and I want to answer." The 3 fairy godmothers exchanged worried glances, but they couldn't keep her locked inside without explaining why, and they weren't ready for that conversation yet. So they let her go, with warnings to stay on familiar paths and promises that she would return before sunset for her birthday feast. Briar Rose practically danced through the forest, her feet barely touching the moss-covered ground. She sang as she walked, and her voice seemed to carry further than usual, echoing off trees and rocks until the whole woodland rang with melody. She didn't notice the way animals gathered to follow her, or how flowers turned their faces toward her as she passed, or how even the sunlight seemed to bend in her direction. What she did notice, eventually, was that she was no longer on any path she recognized. She found herself standing at the edge of a clearing she had never seen before. Though she thought she knew every grove and glade within miles of the cottage, ancient oak trees formed a perfect circle around a meadow, carpeted with wildflowers that seemed to glow in the dappled sunlight. In the center of the clearing stood something that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a tower, but not the sort of tower that belonged in any forest. This one was made of white stone that seemed to shine with its own inner light, spiraling up toward the sky like a seashell or a frozen whirlwind. Ivy covered its base, but not the wild, untended ivy of the deep woods. These vines were perfectly arranged, their leaves forming intricate patterns that looked almost like writing in a language she couldn't read, but somehow understood. At the base of the tower was a door of dark wood, bound with silver hinges, and beside the door grew a single rose bush. But these weren't ordinary roses. They were the deepest red she had ever seen, so dark they were almost black, and they seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The thorns were silver sharp, catching light like tiny mirrors, and the scent that drifted from the blooms was intoxicating, sweet and mysterious, like the memory of a dream just before waking. Briar Rose approached the tower slowly, her hand extended toward the rose bush. She had always loved flowers, had always felt a kinship with growing things, but these roses called to her in a way that made her heart race. They whispered secrets she couldn't quite hear, promised answers to questions she hadn't known she was asking. As her fingers brushed against one perfect bloom, the door of the tower swung open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, she could see stone steps spiraling upward, lit by torches that burned without smoke or heat. The air that drifted out carried the scent of old books and dried lavender, of secrets kept safe for centuries. Without quite knowing why, Briar Rose stepped inside. Her feet found the stairs as if they remembered the way, carrying her up and up through the heart of the tower. She passed windows that looked out onto views that couldn't possibly exist so close to her cottage. One showed a vast desert beneath a star-filled sky. Another revealed a city of crystal spires floating among clouds. A third opened onto an ocean where silver fish swam through liquid moonlight. At the top of the tower was a single round room, and in that room was a sight that stopped Briar Rose in her tracks. Against the far wall stood an ancient spinning wheel, its wood dark with age, but polished to a gleaming finish. The wheel itself was carved with intricate designs that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight, and the spindle, sharp as a needle and bright as starlight, seemed to call to her with a voice she felt rather than heard. She knew, with the certainty that comes in dreams, that she was meant to touch that spindle, that everything in her life had been leading to this moment. The strange dreams that had haunted her sleep, the restless energy that had driven her into the forest, even the birthday itself, all of it had been preparation for this single, shining moment. Behind her, she heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Her aunts had followed her, their voices calling her name with an urgency that cut through the spell-like trance that held her. But their voices seemed to come from very far away, as if she were hearing them from the bottom of a deep well. "Briar Rose, don't touch it," Flora's voice pleaded, breathless from climbing the tower stairs. "Please, dear one, step away from the wheel." But Briar Rose was already reaching out, her finger extended toward the gleaming point of the spindle. In the instant before she touched it, she saw her reflection in its polished surface, and for just a moment, the face looking back at her wasn't Briar Rose at all. It was a princess with golden hair and sapphire eyes, wearing a gown that sparkled like captured starlight. "Aurora," she whispered, and then her finger met the spindle's point. The world exploded into sensation. Not pain, exactly, but a feeling like lightning running through her veins, like music played too loud, like falling upward through infinite space. She felt herself changing, becoming, remembering everything that had been hidden from her for 16 years. Princess Aurora of Rosevale, daughter of King Edmund and Queen Isabel, beloved of 3 fairy godmothers who had sacrificed their magic to keep her safe. The memories flooded back like water through a broken dam. The castle, with its climbing roses. The celebration of her birth. Maleficent's terrible curse, and Merryweather's gentle modification. All of it rushed through her mind in the space between one heartbeat and the next. And then, as Maleficent had promised, sleep claimed her. But it wasn't the cold sleep of death that the sorceress had originally intended. Thanks to Merryweather's gift, it was something far more gentle. Aurora felt herself sinking into dreams as soft as cloud silk, as warm as summer sunshine. Her body settled gracefully onto the floor of the tower room, her golden hair spreading around her like a halo, her face peaceful as a sleeping child's. The three fairy godmothers rushed to her side, their hearts breaking at the sight of their beloved girl lying so still. Flora knelt beside her, brushing golden strands away from Aurora's forehead. Fauna checked her breathing, relieved to find it deep and steady. Merryweather touched the princess's hand, feeling the warmth that proved life still flowed strong within her. "The curse is fulfilled," Flora said softly. "But she lives, she dreams, and somewhere in this world, true love waits to wake her." They carried Aurora down from the tower, and as they did, magic began to spread outward from where she lay. Not the dark magic of Maleficent's curse, but something older and more powerful. The magic of story itself, of tales that must be told, and destinies that must be fulfilled. The tower began to change, its white stone walls becoming transparent as morning mist. Soon, it would vanish entirely, its purpose completed. But the roses at its base would remain, growing wild and free, marking the spot where a princess had accepted her fate with courage. As the fairy godmothers bore Aurora back toward the cottage, they felt their own magic returning to them, no longer needed for hiding, but for protecting. The 100-year sleep had begun, and with it, the countdown to the moment when true love would have its chance to prove itself stronger than any curse. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Aldoria, Prince Philip was preparing for what should have been his wedding day. The arranged marriage to Princess Aurora of Rosevale had been planned for her 16th birthday, a celebration that would unite two kingdoms in peace and prosperity. But messengers had arrived with strange news. The princess had vanished years ago, they said. The entire royal court claimed she had never existed, as if the kingdom itself had forgotten its own princess. Philip's father, King Hubert, was beside himself with confusion and frustration. 16 years we've planned this alliance, he muttered, pacing before the great hearth in his study. 16 years of letters and treaties and preparations. And now they tell me there never was a princess, that King Edmund and Queen Isabel have no daughter. It's madness. But Philip felt something different, stirring in his heart. Not disappointment at a marriage canceled, but a strange sense of anticipation. As if somewhere in the world, an adventure was calling his name. He had always believed that true love was more powerful than arranged marriages, and perhaps this was fate's way of giving him a chance to find it. That night, he dreamed of a voice singing in a forest, pure and sweet as silver bells on a winter morning. He dreamed of golden hair catching sunlight, of eyes like sapphires touched by starlight. And when he woke, he knew with absolute certainty that somewhere in the world, someone was waiting for him to find her. Without telling his father, Philip saddled his horse and rode out at dawn, following nothing more than intuition and the memory of a song from his dreams. He rode south toward the Whispering Woods, though he had never been there and had no logical reason to go. But the heart has its own map, and true love needs no directions. The forest welcomed him as if it had been expecting his arrival. Paths opened before his horse's hooves, leading him deeper into the green heart of the woodland. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and the very air seemed to hum with magic. Birds called to him from the branches, and small woodland creatures darted alongside his horse as if they were escorting him toward his destiny. He rode for hours without feeling tired, his heart growing lighter with each mile. This was what he had been born for, he realized. Not ceremonies and treaties and diplomatic marriages, but this wild ride through an enchanted forest, toward a love that existed beyond reason or arrangement. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Philip came upon a cottage that looked like something from a fairy tale. Smoke curled from its chimney, and warm light glowed in its windows. The garden was filled with impossible flowers, and in the center stood an apple tree, heavy with fruit that seemed to glow like tiny lanterns in the twilight. But it wasn't the cottage that stopped his heart. It was the sight of a young woman lying beneath the apple tree, her golden hair spread across a bed of rose petals, her hands folded peacefully on her chest. She was the most beautiful person he had ever seen, but it wasn't her beauty that called to him. It was the recognition that struck him like lightning. This was the voice from his dreams, the face he had been searching for without knowing it. 3 elderly women sat beside her, their faces kind but lined with worry. They looked up as Philip approached, and something in their eyes told him they had been waiting for him. "Are you," Flora asked softly, "a prince who believes in true love?" Philip dismounted and knelt beside the sleeping figure, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I am a prince," he said quietly, "but more than that. I am a man who has been searching his whole life for the other half of his soul, and I believe I have found her." Fauna smiled through her tears. "Then you know what you must do." Philip nodded, understanding flooding through him like sunrise. This was no ordinary sleep, and he was no ordinary prince who had stumbled upon a maiden by chance. This was destiny, as real and powerful as the turning of the seasons or the rising of the sun. He leaned down, and for a moment that lasted forever, he simply looked at her face. Even in sleep, there was something luminous about her, something that spoke of kindness and joy, and a spirit that no curse could truly touch. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also brave. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the way her hands rested without fear. She had faced whatever brought her to this sleep with courage. "I don't know your name," he whispered, "but I know your heart, and if my love is true enough, strong enough, pure enough to wake you, then I offer it freely, not because of duty or arrangement or the expectations of kingdoms, but because in you I see everything I have ever hoped to find." He kissed her gently, his lips barely brushing hers, and the world held its breath. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then another. Philip began to wonder if he had been wrong, if true love was just another fairy tale after all. But then Aurora's eyes fluttered open, blue as summer sky, bright as the first star of evening. She looked up at him with wonder, as if she were seeing the sun rise for the first time. And when she smiled, Philip felt his heart complete itself in a way he had never known. It was incomplete. "I've been dreaming of you," she said softly, her voice, like music, made audible. "For so long, I've been dreaming of you. You, long. I've been dreaming of, and I have been searching for you," Philip replied, helping her sit up beneath the apple tree. Though I never knew what I was searching for until this moment. The three fairy godmothers watched with joy as their beloved Aurora awakened not just from cursed sleep, but to the truth of her own identity. The memories were gentle now, no longer overwhelming, but settling into her mind like pieces of a puzzle, finally finding their proper places. "My aunts," Aurora said, looking at Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather with eyes that now held the wisdom of both Briar Rose and Princess Aurora. "You kept me safe all these years. You gave up your magic, your true forms, everything to protect me." Flora's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "We gave up nothing, dear one. Loving you has been our greatest joy." As Aurora stood, supported by Philip's gentle hands, something magical began to happen throughout the Whispering Woods. The 100-year sleep hadn't affected just the princess, but the entire kingdom of Rosevale. For 16 years, since the night Aurora disappeared, a strange drowsiness had settled over the land, like morning mist that never quite burned away. People went about their daily lives, but slowly, dreamingly. Conversations happened in soft voices. Laughter was gentle rather than hearty. Even the roses on the castle walls had grown in slow motion, their blooms lasting longer, but opening more gradually, as if time itself had grown thick as honey. Now, as true love's kiss awakened the princess, that enchantment began to lift. In the castle, King Edmund and Queen Isabel suddenly sat up straighter at their evening meal, blinking as if waking from a long, pleasant dream. Servants moved with more energy. Guards stood taller at their posts. The very stones of the castle seemed to hum with renewed life. "Something has changed," Queen Isabel whispered to her husband, pressing her hand to her heart. "Do you feel it? As if a weight I didn't know I carried has suddenly lifted." King Edmund nodded, his eyes bright with sudden hope. "Perhaps our prayers have been answered at last." In the forest, Aurora looked around at the cottage that had been her home, at the impossible garden where she had spent so many happy hours, at the three women who had raised her with such devoted love. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet everything was different because she was different. She carried 2 lifetimes of memories now, 2 sets of experiences that somehow fit together perfectly, like harmonies in a song. "Will you come with us?" she asked her fairy godmothers. "Back to the castle. My parents will want to thank you, and I cannot imagine a life without you in it." Merryweather clapped her hands together, her blue eyes twinkling with delight. "Did you hear that? She wants us to come home with her." "Of course we'll come," Fauna said, already beginning to pack their few belongings with quick, efficient movements. "Though I must say, I've grown rather fond of this little cottage. Perhaps we can visit it sometimes, for holidays and quiet moments." Prince Philip stood quietly beside Aurora, still amazed by the turn his life had taken in a single day. He had ridden out that morning as a prince without purpose, following nothing but a dream and a hope. Now he stood beside the woman he knew, with absolute certainty he would love for the rest of his life and beyond. "Your Highness," he said formally, offering Aurora his arm, "might I have the honor of escorting you home?" Aurora laughed, the sound like silver bells dancing in a gentle breeze. "My name is Aurora, or Briar Rose, or whatever you'd like to call me. But please, don't call me Your Highness as if I'm someone distant and untouchable. I may be a princess, but I'm also the girl who grew up singing to birds and talking to squirrels. I'm both, and I always will be." "Then, Aurora it is," Philip said, and the way he spoke her name made it sound like poetry. though I reserve the right to think of several other names for you as well, like beautiful and brave, and the other half of my heart." As they prepared to leave the cottage, Flora waved her hand and spoke her first intentional magic spell in 16 years. "Let this place remain," she said, "as a reminder of love and sacrifice in the power of simple kindness. Let it be a haven for any who need shelter, a place where magic and ordinary life dance together in perfect harmony." The cottage shimmered for a moment, then settled back into itself. But now it carried a new enchantment. It would never grow old or fall into disrepair. Travelers lost in the woods would find it when they needed shelter. Children who had lost their way would discover it just as darkness began to fall, and they would always find food in the pantry, wood for the fire, and soft beds to rest in. The apple tree in the garden would continue to bear fruit in all seasons, and the impossible flowers would bloom year-round. A reminder that in a world touched by magic, beauty, and wonder could flourish anywhere. As the small party began their journey toward the castle, other figures began moving through the forest. Word travels quickly in an enchanted wood, carried by birds and whispered by the wind through the leaves. The news spread from tree to tree, from stream to meadow, from the tiniest flower to the mightiest oak the princess had awakened. True love had conquered the curse. The long, gentle sleep was ending. In a tower far to the north, where shadows gathered thick as storm clouds, Maleficent felt the change like a physical blow. She had been so certain that true love was just another fairy tale, another empty promise meant to comfort the weak and foolish. But the breaking of her curse sent ripples through the magical realm that could not be ignored. For a moment, rage flared in her heart like green fire. 16 years of waiting, 16 years of believing that finally, she had crafted a victory that could not be undone. But then, unexpectedly, something else stirred within her, something that might have been relief. For Maleficent carried her own curse, older and deeper than any spell she had ever cast. The curse of bitterness, of a heart that had forgotten how to hope, of a soul that had turned away from love so long ago that she had convinced herself it didn't exist. But if true love was real enough to break enchantments, perhaps it was real enough to heal even the deepest wounds. She did not act on this moment of softness, not yet. But she also did not gather her powers to strike again at the princess who had escaped her web. Instead, she simply watched from her distant tower as love lit up the darkness and wondered if perhaps there might be redemption, even for someone like her. Meanwhile, Aurora and Philip walked hand in hand through the forest, their path lit by moonbeams and the soft glow that always surrounded places where true magic dwelt. The fairy godmothers walked ahead of them, their steps light with joy, their voices soft as they planned the reunion that awaited them at the castle. "Tell me about your life," Aurora said to Philip as they walked. "What was it like, growing up as a prince? Did you always know you would marry someone you'd never met?" Philip considered this, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I knew about the arrangement, yes, but I always hoped that somehow love would find a way into the equation. My father believes in practical alliances, but my mother always told me that the strongest kingdoms are built on hearts that choose each other freely." "And now?" Aurora asked, glancing up at him through her lashes. "Now I know she was right," Philip said simply. "I would choose you in this life, and every life that follows, princess or peasant, with kingdoms to unite, or nothing but the clothes on our backs. I would choose you always. Aurora felt warmth spread through her chest like sunrise. And I would choose you, not because of duty or arrangement or the expectations of our parents, but because when I look at you, I see home. As they walked, Philip told her about his kingdom, about the rolling hills covered in wildflowers, about the harbor where ships brought treasures from distant lands, about the people who would soon be her people, too. Aurora shared stories of her life in the cottage, of mornings spent gathering berries, of evenings by the fire listening to her aunt's stories, of the deep contentment she had found in a life of simple pleasures and honest work. I want to keep some of that, she said thoughtfully. The simplicity, the connection to growing things, the joy in small moments. Can a princess still gather her own berries sometimes? Can she still sing to the birds and help in the kitchen? A princess can be anything she chooses to be, Philip assured her. And the princess I've fallen in love with is someone who finds magic in everyday moments. I hope you never lose that, because it's part of what makes you who you are. And so, our tale draws to its gentle close, like the last notes of a lullaby fading into the quiet of night. Princess Aurora and Prince Philip found their way home to Rosevale, where joy bloomed brighter than any rose that ever climbed those castle walls. They married, not because kingdoms demanded it, but because their hearts had chosen each other. In that magical moment beneath the apple tree, the three fairy godmothers became the most beloved members of the royal court, their wisdom and kindness guiding the realm for generations to come. As you drift toward your own dreams tonight, remember that true love exists not just in fairy tales, but in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, in every heart that chooses hope over fear. Sleep well, dear dreamers. May your rest be as peaceful as Aurora's, and may you wake to find magic waiting in the morning light.